Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending upon when you're listening to this. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the Voice and Visibility and SoGal presentation series. It's been a pleasure to put this together, especially during this time and working with Shannon Rohrer-Phillips and her team. And I really look forward to having this discussion today. When considering what to present on with diversity and inclusion, the first thing we think about is who you are and when we introduce ourselves to others. Now, for me, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Simi Ranajee. Some people call me Dr. Ranajee. Some call me Mrs. Ranajee. Some call me Simi, Mama, Wifey, Sister, Simju, Sim Smiley. So just like you, I'm sure there's a range of names that you have and different types of greetings that you do depending upon the situation and where you feel comfortable. When you look at me, you'll see your basic perception. You can see that I'm a woman of color, probably middle-aged, female, with an American accent. Real basic ways to identify and perhaps judge a little bit. Those are my basic physical appearances. But as you can see on this slide, we are deeper than we appear. I'm more than just my skin color, my gender, my physical traits, behaviors, or body size, or type of, you can even tell that on a Zoom presentation. But we all are so much more than our surface, right? What's our culture? What's our geographic location? Are we parents? What's our work background? What's our education, our beliefs? So much to consider that makes up us as individuals. Another important consideration is not only the individual that we're meeting, but in what context. What am I meeting you for? Who is introducing us? Why are we meeting? Where are we meeting? When? Is it for breakfast? Is it late at night? And how are we meeting? Are we doing it virtually because of COVID? Are we doing it another way? These are all considerations of our introduction and perceptions of others. Now, there's many things that are usually not shared. I mean, we don't share things because we don't want to be judged. Or some things are just really personal. Did you know that I love animals and I like dogs? Or that I had cancer? Or years ago I had won a beauty pageant? These are all things that are very personal to me. And when I get to know someone, I'm very proud of them, but they're usually not in the first meeting. So what are your things? What do you kind of keep close to your vest or that you don't share, but really are part of who you are? And so many of us don't share these things. Because when we meet somebody, we try and put them in boxes because it's easier for us. I mean, I had a typical life. You can see I have, 2 children, a sister, my parents. I went out a lot. What do your pictures look like? I'm an Indian girl in pretty much of a white world the way that I was raised. The first time that I actually realized was my wedding about how Indian I was and that my friends didn't even realize. They didn't realize I'd be coming out in an Indian outfit or that I was marrying an Indian person. They didn't know that I could speak the language or that some of them didn't even know I was Miss India. The interesting thing was that they only saw me as a tri-adult or a volleyball player or dancing or working. It's a really different persona, and I realized I didn't really share a lot of that side with others. And when my son went to India, my husband and I took our kids a couple of years ago, his cousin said to him, you're Indian. And he said, no, I'm not. And he said, Mom, I didn't realize how Indian we are. He just thought he was American. He had never said that he was Indian American. And so we had some really interesting conversations of what that means to have both worlds as part of your world. And although my son may have been immune to it and not realizing, we learn that kids emulate behavior. That by the age of 6 months, babies are noticing racial differences. And by 4, children have been showing signs of racial bias. We start realizing that there is racial bias and that there are microaggressions in the universe and in our world, that we tend to become fearful. And we stay in our bubble because it's easier. It's easier than going out and facing the unknown or what we may not understand. As we get older, we realize that we stay in this bubble as a sense of security. And so there's a saying that you surround yourself with who you want to emulate. The 5 closest people to you are predictors of qualities that you probably have. So who do you go to when you have a question, or when you're consulting about something, or something happened and you're not sure of how to react to it? Who do you bounce ideas off of, whether it's at work or at home? We stay in our bubble a lot of times because we're fearful. Many times we want validation, but that bubble is our sense of security and our sense of home. And in our bubble, many times, people with similar attitudes, beliefs, or values are there for us. But today the world is so divisive. And even though our friends have the same, the articles that we look for, the data that supports what we already believe, we align with this. And so we don't go outside of that bubble. We end up blocking people on social media. We end up not inviting others who may be coming from a different viewpoint, whether it's religion or politics or way to raise your children or things that you feel we should do at work or not go back to work. So think about that. Do people in your bubble have the same attitudes, beliefs, and values? And these attitudes, beliefs, and values are our identity. They're layers of learning of who we are, what we learn, what we've taught, what we think, what we say, what our values are. And why is our identity important? Because it helps us define us ourselves. When I was doing my doctorate, I remember having lunch with a friend, and we started talking about history and where we came from and what languages we spoke. And she was an African American friend, and she said to me, Simi, you're so lucky because you can go back to India and know your grandparents and know their parents and understand that they went through partition in 1947 and understand where their parents were from. She said, I only know my grandfather. She goes, we came over as slaves. And at that moment, I thought, wow, her identity has shaped her, that she really didn't know where in Africa she was from. And she said, I'm always searching. And so that was very, very interesting to me. Do you know your identity? So people may not know their identity, or they don't know what diversity is. I mean, even an anchorman, Ron Burgundy, said, I could be wrong, but diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War. No, it may have been, but no, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity today. Diversity is an accumulation of so many different variables. It's not only the top of what we saw from that iceberg. It's everything on this wheel and more. It's our experiences, it's our age, it's our appearance, it's our organizational role, and everyone holds different values to their diversity and their variables in diversity. So maybe you like hanging out or working with people your own age, or maybe you feel more comfortable with a certain gender, or perhaps a race or ethnicity. Those are things that we need to consider when we look at who's in our bubble. We hear in the news every day about BLM, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, different definitions of protest, rioting, looting. We see murders and killings, and we understand that COVID-19, coronavirus 2019, is the worst pandemic of our lifetime. So many today are filled with fear and anxiety. In addition to these new situations, it's trying to educate our children, trying to have them understand that we're still learning and we're trying to be as normal as we can. But these 3 C's are really challenging us in diversity and inclusion. So how do we make diverse people feel included? Well, the simple definition of inclusion is making similarities and differences work. How do we celebrate the differences? How do we understand why people act in a certain way? How do we be open? How do we be respectful? How do we look at others and value their differences and their abilities? Well, if you look at intersectionality, the overlapping of intersecting of various social identities, race, gender, sexuality, class, as you see here. This overlapping and the systemic oppression and discrimination by an individual, this is where it comes from, this intersectionality. And the more that we can understand and shared experiences of another, the more we can start to educate ourselves on helping and becoming a culture of inclusion and celebrating that diversity. Back in 2016, two of my dear friends met at Pulse. At that time, it was the worst tragedy of mass shooting in the US. I called her when I was working for the largest communications firm in the world and said, what can we do to help you? We brought together 35 disparate LGBTQ groups, media trained under one voice and one message, not to talk about the differences, not to talk about whether they were gay, straight, bisexual, whether they were Hispanic, whatever their orientation was. It was about bringing one voice together to show that Orlando was strong. And I remember during that time when I was up there in Orlando, they asked me, why are you helping? You're an Indian straight female. And I thought that was the stupidest question, because we're human. At a basic level, we all feel the same. All these differences, these beautiful differences, and this diversity is for us to learn and experience a different way of life. It shouldn't separate us. There's an online survey in 27 markets with over 33,000 respondents that's done between October 19th and November 16th every year. What it talks about is during diversity and inclusion work, what are people looking for in terms of leadership? There's something called the trust barometer. This trust barometer shows us that what they want is for CEOs and leaders to speak up, to put their employees first and be an example. So if you are a leader in an organization, what do? How do you lift each other up the mountain? How do you share your personal stories and your backstory so that people feel comfortable with you as an individual, not only as a leader? We look in the workplace of stereotypes. They don't allow for any individuality. What kind of expectations or a social group won't allow us to be who we are? When we look at Harvard Business Review, in the workplace, 61% of people fear being stifled. We adjust, we change our grooming, we change our behavior, we change our ability to stand up and feel comfortable. We want to be less of ourselves so that we can feel normal for others. Is that what we really want to be? Do we want to assimilate to the point that we're conforming so much that our uniqueness is not there? No. We want to celebrate our uniqueness, and we want to be inclusive. Even in our work, we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was running Performance Health Systems. PowerPlay was our product, and we were in 93 countries. We looked at our core product, which is our core individual. And we had so many different verticals for so many different countries. And we put those countries and sold our product in a way that it would be accepted there. So for example, France, it was weight loss and cellulite. In Germany, it was prevention. In US, it was fitness. So looking at all the different verticals that we went through, healthcare, celebrity, golf, and sports, every country had a different way that it understood. Just like when we walk into a room, we might have a relationship with another female because we share things being common to us as females, that intersectionality. So we do this at work as well. When we meet a new person, the first thing, just like the trust barometer, is we ask ourselves, can we trust this person? It's deeply based on survival. If we don't feel that we can trust someone, we instinctively feel the need to protect ourselves and our interest. We respond to the warmth of a person, their openness, their authenticity. The more of this we feel, the more likely we are to trust that person and open up. And we talk a lot about judging. You know, it says, don't judge my story by the chapter you walked in on. I'm sure you were very different 10 years ago, and you may be another different person in another 10 years. So when you meet somebody, look at them who they are today, not who they were before. So part of diversity and inclusion is actually doing the work personally and doing the work professionally to understand what are our authentic attitudes, values, and beliefs. What are our influences? If we would have had different influences growing up, if we would have come from a different geography or had different parents or were influenced by different people, would we be different? And are we creating our bubble so that we have those experiences that we can share and understand very different types of individuals? We know in business, diversity is linked to gains. There's 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee, according to Deloitte. Greater chance of higher financial return and more sales revenue by the Harvard Business Review. So diversity is really good for business. And from a discrimination perspective, it's protected under EEOC. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission requires that people of race, color, nation of origin, religion, persons with disabilities, sexual, or anybody over 40, that they be protected within your work environment. So how do we set the example? Diversity and inclusion leaders and CEOs, we need to set this example. How diverse is your senior management? Who comes to the table for your meetings? Do you have a D&I statement or policies? What is your regional diversity data? Who is your end customer? A lot of times when we do communications work, we look at that end customer and see how we can broaden our market. Can we reach into these multicultural markets? Is it just language? Is it other cultural nuances that we need to adjust for with our products or our services? Let's translate this into our work and set the example and do better in business. So our key takeaways for today are: be curious, make friends and hire employees outside of your comfort zone, outside of your bubble, different socioeconomic age experience, be open, listen to understand and not to judge. There's a study that came out that said majority of us listen to respond. We don't listen to understand. If you already have the answer in your mind of what you're going to say, you're not listening to listen. You're listening to share and judge a little bit. And lastly, be accepting, be inclusive. It's really good for business and it's really good personally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simi Ranajee, for your presentation today. And I want to thank SoGal for your leadership and your commitment to racial and gender equity and impact investing. I'm a proud Sarasota SoGal chapter lead, and I'm really thrilled to bring Simi into this space. So I want to thank you for your consent to allow me to address you as Simi. I do need to tell our listeners that we met 3 years ago at a coffee shop and power bonded. And then we power bonded again on our shared experience as TEDx speakers at USF-SM.
And birthday twins.
And we're birthday twins. We share the same birthday. So she graciously gave me permission to address her in this fireside chat today as Simi, but we did want to make sure that our listeners knew we're colleagues and friends. And, you know, Simi, I wanted to start on a more heart-centered tone with asking you how you are holding up your family and your business during this really complicated time with COVID, with racial tensions. How is your world?
Wow, I could spend the entire day talking about that.
I bet.
So COVID and racial tension for myself, my family, and work is just been so heavy. Starting with myself, you know, we'll start with COVID and the racial injustice. Personally, and you know my TED Talk, I'm immunocompromised with COVID, with lung issues. So that's first thing. Second, I've been called upon because of my doctorate in public health to articulate some of the messaging and the confusion around this coronavirus 2019 disease state that's happening, this pandemic that no one really knew how we were going to handle it. Even other countries we're setting examples, but in the US, is it a hoax? Is it not? How is it being presented? What do we need to do? So personally, that's been a lot of challenges and education. For my family, the quarantine, quite frankly, Shannon, it's been quite a blessing. Just being together, the four of us, and spending time and realizing that we run around so much with activities and sports and classes and presentations and our social life that we actually had some time to just breathe, come together, understand what's important, and just love and embrace this time that we've had. So for the family, it's been different, and we've had some really crucial conversations. And then in business, there's been, I do believe necessity is the mother of invention. And for my business, it's been incredible because new roles are coming into play. There's something called the Chief Health Officer, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but I've been brought on as some consultancy work, where I can actually go in and educate individuals, companies that are starting, for what does it mean to have a healthy and safe environment at work. Different than an HR perspective, different than an MD in the office, but going in and making sure that they're 6 feet apart for social distancing, that we're doing surveys before employees are coming back in. What is it that we need? Where do we need hand washing stations? What's comfortable? Do some immunocompromised employees need to stay home? Do we need to stagger days in and out of the office? What's the airflow look like?
Sure.
Is there light? So from that perspective, work's been really interesting in creating these new opportunities. Now, from a racial injustice perspective, looking at personally, I was born in India, raised in the US, and have had prejudice and bias my entire life. Working has been a passion and a privilege. I was on the first ever Edelman Global board for our clients, our global clients, to see how business and diversity and inclusion were impacted and how it makes such a huge difference in business. So that was a privilege and eye-opening. When it came to my family, we're from Chicago. We moved to the South about 6 years ago. And it was a big wake-up call, realizing that people didn't know what India was down here. To be honest, we're a big minority. In Chicago, there was other Indians and other Chicago kids, in Chicago, my children had a lot of like-minded, like-looking kids like themselves. Here they don't. So they were put in a box that they weren't familiar with. They would come up and speak Spanish to them first. Most people think they were Puerto Rican just because there was a larger Puerto Rican influence down here. Right. So I had to educate my family and say, look, this is an opportunity for us to educate others. That being said, with everything that's going on today from racial injustice, the conversations of equality and standing up and speaking your mind and understanding what privileges we do have and looking at things from other people's points of views, not just judging, has been really an opportunity that I don't think our children or even our colleagues or our family members have ever had before.
I agree. So it sounds like, honestly, you live in this space personally, professionally, and yet for you, one of the pieces that's been holding an anchor, if you will, and tell me if I'm wrong, Simi, is that being anchored and focusing on your family and focusing on how do we vicariously experience this and then heal together, protect ourselves together, and also how do I lead my company in this climate? That's a tall order.
Yeah.
It's a tall order, and so many women and so many women of color are leading this order. So I want to thank you for being so honest and so open with our listeners. Simi, professionally, you have earned a PhD and an MBA, which is quite a powerful combination. And, tell us, why did you choose to pursue both degrees, and how do they influence your role as CEO of IMISCO today?
So one of the things that always fascinated me and that I was raised with in our culture, education is everything. They can't take it away from you. It's the basis for having self-confidence, understanding, and awareness, critical thinking. So when I started my first job, which was in pharmaceuticals, they offered an MBA program. 80% of it was paid as long as you got A's and above, or 90%, I don't remember. But it was an opportunity. And I do believe that you have to lead by example, as you mentioned earlier. And so whatever you can do to make yourself better, you do that. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in a conference with my MBA and had a client that I had actually written her presentation for at a medical conference. And somebody said to me, you know so much, you should be up there speaking. But they only know doctors or PhDs, MDs, PhDs, DOs, etc. And it was at a time where the presentation was about that we were the first generation that was going to outlive our children because it's happening in the public health arena. What type of foods they're being fed, where the food's coming from, what the animals are eating, all of this incredible knowledge. And I thought, you know what? This reading Omnivore's Dilemma, being on stage, listening to these presentations and thinking, I have to make more of an impact. What's happening for our children? What's happening in our society? What is that education that we need to put forward? So as I said, you learn as much as you can and you lead by example. And I went back at the age of 37 and got my doctorate.
And where did you get your degrees?
So my undergrad was at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, which was in marketing and finance. My MBA was at Loyola in marketing and finance as well. And my doctorate's from Commonwealth out of the UK, and it's in public health.
Beautiful. And again, for our listeners who are predominantly women, I just love meeting women like you, leaders who are raising children, obtaining multiple degrees. It can be done. So you mentioned this healthcare officer role, and that really intrigues me. And I think it's, as you mentioned, in your expertise, this could be one of the ways that diversity and inclusion gets actualized in the business sector. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more just currently, kind of give us a forecast? Are there a lot of corporations already incorporating this health officer role? Did any of them have it in place before COVID, or are we going to see a quick response in this space because of the pandemic that we're in?
So the chief health officer role is really interesting. It is because of the pandemic, and not only from an educational perspective for employees and senior leaders, but just like diversity and inclusion work, there's protections in place. As I mentioned with EEOC, you're sharing that you have a commitment to your employees. You have a commitment to their health and wellness, not only their capabilities within their office and their work. So I think it'll be a lot more chief health officers.
Good. We need them. We all need them. I know that you and I have spoken about that role for those of us in the event production space. It's incredibly relevant and we all need it. And so is that going to be primarily where you're focusing your diversity and inclusion services and the clientele you're working with now? Or are there other ranges of D&I work that you and IMISCO focus on?
So there's other ranges. As a communication strategist, we look at ways, understanding target audiences and the differences and what resonates with each audience and how it has to be diverse and how it has to be equitable and inclusive. So things, for example, if we're looking at a product or service for an older generation or an older population, maybe the font size has to be bigger because they'll be able to read it, not have to put on readers or glasses.
Right.
Maybe pictures or the dress or the attire is something that's going to feel comfortable to them. There's every generation, every geography, every age, every person has a different way that they respond to whether it's colors, whether it's fonts, we want to make sure that we're getting the most in terms of communication and understanding by our messaging. Excellent. So we're very sensitive.
Yeah, I think messaging is crucial. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely crucial, and it's certainly relevant in the work that my team and I are doing, which is focusing a little bit more on anti-racism work with white leaders and white racial identity and white responsibility. And so our messaging, our content, and our services are being customized to that demographic because we think the ROI on increasing awareness in white leadership that has been underexposed to racial injustice is critical.
And you're perfect for it because it's authentic to you.
Yes. Yes.
And you speak because, with all due respect, you are white.
Yes.
It's from a point of knowledge and authenticity and purity. Like that's the biggest thing when we talk about trust, as I did in the presentation, and authenticity is coming up and speaking on diversity from a white perspective. I do it.
Yeah, it's a complicated space. And ironically, I think I told you, I actually wrote my master's thesis on this 20 years ago and did a lot of work in this space. And so it's bittersweet that here we are 20 years later, and the work is really relevant, but I feel called to do it and very privileged to do it. But Simi, I wanted to move on and talk about something that is devastating and contributing to the magnitude of racial unrest and tension and trauma. And that is that prior to May 25th, the night that George Floyd was murdered, America's COVID numbers were at about 110,000. And the messaging and the communications were starting to consistently reveal that Black and Brown people were disproportionately represented in mortality rates from COVID. Can you help our listeners understand why?
So it's interesting. The facts do 100% show that. I mean, there's research been done in 39 states and District of Columbia where 13% of the population is actually 27% of the mortality rate. That's just numbing to hear, because why is it? Is it something physiologically? But once again, when you look at public health, we talk about racial equality and understanding what type of messaging and what access do people have to the messaging. One of the biggest issues in healthcare literacy is understanding what you're being told. So if you go visit a physician and they might tell you, or even a thought leader, let's say, and you hear on the news, you must wear a mask. Well, majority of us may be able to go get a mask, or may be able to sew a mask, or may be able to wear, get one from maybe the hospital, stop in someplace. Is there access to masks? Where do we get them? We talk about healthy living and healthy lifestyle choices. If you only have McDonald's in your geography, you may not have that opportunity. So as you know, access is a big thing. Education is a big component of this.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we've heard is that lifestyle, meaning that how many people are in your home? What is your job? What is your function? What do you need to do? So if you're a delivery person, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you may not have luxury to stay at home or shelter in place. Your employment may not be one that you can do Zoom calls and so all of those risk factors are multiplied in certain communities. And we see that happening in African American communities, Latino communities, unfortunately, where how do we equal the playing field and making sure that all the things that some of us are able to do there as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's relevant, and I want to share with our listeners, Simi was very open in her TED Talk. Her TED Talk is entitled, My Holes Can Sing. You talked about your health issues, your challenges with lung cancer. And I wonder if you can share with our listeners just why and how this experience that you've had to endure has kind of informed your commitment to health and wellness and public health, with an emphasis on looking at it from a diversity lens.
So it's a great question, because prior to me having lung cancer, I actually launched the first non-small cell cancer drug with Alcori and Pfizer in communications, interviewing patients who had lung cancer. And now here I was, decades later, sitting across the other side of the table, having it and thinking, oh my God, what stupid questions I asked. Because being a cancer patient, questioning every part of your existence in your life and whether you were going to be there for your children, and whether, I stopped making plans 6 months ahead because I was scared. And that depth of fear is really hard to translate into words. So, once again, that's another diversity experience, right? I'm coming to the table with something different that someone else may not have, that shared experience mentality. So it's really impacted the work that I do when I'm looking at disease states, when I'm looking at things that people are going through. And especially during this time, I'll tell you, I understand the anxiety. When I saw George Floyd and him saying, I can't breathe, as an asthma patient, as somebody who has 40% of their lung capacity removed, as understanding that COVID is actually a respiratory illness, so many things were bombarding me, and I thought, okay, we need to take a deep breath, literally, and pause and understand where can we make a positive impact. And all of this negative and all of this divisiveness that's happening in our world today, how are we going to articulate for our children that this is an opportunity? that what does it mean to protest, riot, or loot? And I'll tell you, my own perceptions of what's been happening has changed. I've opened myself up to understand, why is there such things as looting? And why are people doing that? That doesn't make sense to me. And I've watched and understood that 400 years of slavery and no changes and the game being changed. And I've understood that people coming from environments that are different than mine is the only way that they know. I don't condone it,
Right.
but I can understand it, and I can do it through love and education versus judgment. And I think if there's anything that this time of physical angst with the pandemic, with cultural and diversity and societal angst that our children are seeing, with sheltering in place and being at home from a child and education perspective, that this gives us an opportunity to decide, do we want to do this through anger or through love?
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to through our myopic views, or through an education of what are you feeling and why are you saying it like that, as being judgmental for them? So that's been really eye-opening to me. I've tried to shift and look through different lenses depending upon who's speaking.
Right. Which that point right there, I think, is so critical. And I want to make sure folks are absorbing that. That's powerful. It's really holding space with who is speaking, what is their lens. And I think that is one way that, I know you're a heart-centered leader. We always identify ourselves as heart-centered leaders, that if we can lead with that compassion, that empathy, then we are we're in the right operating space for progress. I also want to ask you, as an entrepreneur, and I also, you mentioned children and this next generation. I've long believed that technology and social causes, when delivered responsibly, can be absolute game changers. Do you see opportunities that could help close the racial disparities in the healthcare sector through technology and innovation? Do you hold optimism, and do you invite young entrepreneurs to jump into this space?
Definitely. As you can see, even if you just Google hackathons or competitions or technology all over our country, and even globally, I know in Tampa there's one as well, where solutions for things of like COVID-19 or education or access to certain information, what's available through the government, is all being shared through technology today. And one of the things, when you mentioned earlier about my doctorate, it's interesting because there's so many things, whether it's pharmaceuticals, devices, diagnostics, or even educational components, that are coming to the forefront, but don't go through that rigorous analysis because we need it today.
Yes.
So like a vaccine for COVID, we're going to fast track that. We need it today. We don't have time to go through all of the traditional approvals that we may have for some other vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Of the need. So just like in technology, just like our opportunity today, yes, I would invite the, whatever generation, whether you're
right, even middle-aged women like us.
Yes, exactly. To look at what are we using today. And we always talk about in our presentations how Uber wasn't made by a taxi company, right? Airbnb wasn't put together by a Marriott. These are things that have been literally shaken the way that we operate through a really different platform. And these are technology platforms. Uber is technology. Airbnb is technology. Yeah. It's not the hotel industry. And serving and is fulfilling those needs. We started IMISCO because I realized whether it was opioid addiction, whether it was other public health issues, the way to win against any sort of aggression is collaboratively. So IMISCO stands for Impacting Issues Collaboratively, because together, we can do more.
I love it. So in closing, I hope our listeners are hearing this open invitation from Simi, and I certainly echo it, to get into a space and explore healthcare innovation and solutions. And if it's not healthcare, explore the use of technology for your diversity and inclusion advocacy. As we close here, Simi, I wondered if you could share one golden piece of advice that you might offer this community of listeners who are dedicated to diversity and inclusion and innovation and impact investing. But what's one piece of advice that you want to share before we close?
So I actually started my presentation a little bit in this regard, where I really think it's profound if you sit and meet yourself. Whether you're a leader organization, a CEO, we're all influencers. We all are our own media company today with our social platforms and things that we do. But take a step back, and whether it's writing it down, whether it's looking in the mirror, whether it's going through your history, and who are you? Where were you born? What are your influences? What political party are you engaged with? Why are you engaged with that? What do you believe is to be true in terms of your diet, in terms of your social skills? Who do you surround yourself with? Who do you bounce ideas off of? And I would implore you, invite you to change that. I always tell my children, and surround yourself with people you want to emulate. But if your 5 people in your world look like you, act like you, eat like you, speak like you, are your same religion, are you opening up who you are and what you believe? And if they are that similar to you, I truly think that you might be doing yourself a disservice, because the world is amazing. And that global platform and that ability to kind of say, wow, that's really cool, or taste something different. Our children do it. If they try food, they'll be like, oh, that's really good. It's different. You know, it tastes, it just, but when an adult tries something new, they're like, oh, it tastes like. We have to put it in a reference point in a box so that we can kind of say, it's okay, we can do this. So that's really it. Open it up. Have lunch with somebody old or young, or somebody who comes from a different country, or different, even it's a different business model than what you're used to, right? If you're a physician, maybe have lunch with somebody in technology. Just really open it up, because I think that's where we grow. And that's a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, but uncomfortable leads to education. And I'll close with that.
I love that closing. Open up, expand your network. Dr. Simi Ranajee, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being a friend. And thank you for all that you are bringing to the universe.